Again, it's a pleasure to now properly introduce Daniel Zaken. He's the military and political correspondent of the Globes newspaper, works for Al Monitor, which is a Mediterranean virtual outlet for news about the Middle East that both Arabs and Israelis and Turks and other work in it, and also 20 years Danny was a senior journalist for the Voice of Israel, and today works for Galei Israel, which is another radio outlet. So, and he was also the chairperson of the Association of the Journalists of Israel. And what he's going to talk to us about today is what is called the New Middle East, but what we may call the New Middle East, and the Abrahamic Accord in the perspective of the nuclear Iranian threat and how it changed the Middle East. I will just say one sentence to connect what we already did to this talk. So for 50 years, Israeli-Arab relationships were about the Palestinian issue that was not solved after the 67 days war. And here, when we talk about the Abraham Accord and the Iranian threat, actually the scene, the perspective, the Middle Eastern perspective is changing. And also we have new players that enter the scene, both Netanyahu's rule in Israel, President Trump here in the US, and the new voices that are being heard in the Gulf states. So Danny, it's great that you're here.
I think we'll go back to the year 2000. And that's a crucial year, even though there was no real war in it. But what happened there, anyone has a clue?
The Intifada.
Yes, and what happened just a little bit before the Intifada?
Camp David?
Right. Camp David was basically an attempt by the Americans again to get the Israelis and Palestinians together, continuing the Oslo Accords. Okay, Oslo Accords, I'll just go a little back just to touch bases, were signed in 1994 after the first Intifada, which is, the Intifada is a word for uprising of Palestinians that started a few years before, 89, and continued until about 92, and it led to a different Israeli government, that the head of the government then was Rabin, Yitzhak Rabin. He was elected 92, and then he said that he wants to have an agreement. Up till then, since 77, right-wingers were, since 77, right? Yeah, right-wingers were on top of the government, Begin and others, and Rabin was the first back to the center-left, even though he was chief of staff and the minister of defense, so he was he wasn't like lefty, he was kind of center. And then he said he decided to do so, and then after the Intifada, they started talks quietly, and then it ended with the Oslo agreements that based Palestinian autonomy in some of the parts of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Arafat he was before a terrorist, now he became the head of a terrorist organization. He got rehabilitation from Israel and became the head of the Palestinian people in Judea, Samaria. He went to Ramallah. I was there in the ceremony that he got into Ramallah. Again, history. And then, but it didn't really work. It didn't really work from different reasons. The main reason was terror by different Palestinian fractions, including of Arafat's himself fraction, those that didn't like the peace agreement, and others like Hamas, which is the Islamic movement, and Jihad Islamic, which is again another Islamic movement, and others. Lots of terror attacks, lots of Israelis were killed, and it basically almost broke everything. And in 2000, Ehud Barak, the Israeli prime minister then, again from the labor, again from the center-left, another chief of staff, went to Camp David. President Clinton tried to achieve the peace with Yasser Arafat. It didn't work. Arafat refused to get the proposal that said 94% of Judea Samaria to the Palestinians. Jerusalem, basically the holy area would be under international rule, kind of, and he didn't accept that, especially because of the refugees issue. They wanted to have the right to bring all of them back, including to Israel itself, and Israel refused. And anyway, there was a big debate about it. Ehud Barak came back, and what he said was basically the first step toward putting Palestinians out of the picture, or out of the Palestinian issue out of the table in the Middle East. What he said is, we have no partner for peace. And for Israelis, especially the Israeli left, and Israelis in general, to hear that from the leader of the center-left Israeli fractions was a big, big blow. You see, okay, we tried everything. There's no way they can accept. They got almost everything they wanted. They refused, and we don't have to deal with that anymore. A few days later, the second Intifada started, and now it was worse. It was worse because Palestinians had weapons, because they had the Palestinian police and other intelligence fractions and others, and they had weapons, and there was almost a war. I think there were like a few hundred of Israelis killed, mainly civilians, in terror attacks. And then Israeli went into the Palestinian towns again, broke all the fractions, and arrested a lot, and etc. etc. It ended with nothing, basically, meaning the Palestinians hit of course, everything, lives of people, economy, and the Palestinian authority became weak, very, very weak. And one other major thing that happened is the Arab countries start to feel against them, especially the moderate one. Listen, what's going on with you? We tried to help you, and nothing happened. And the war continues, and we are in our own problems. And that was the first step. Year 2000, that's a very important time. And then, if we're jumping forward, something else happened. We mentioned the countries that fought Israel during the wars, and there was another country that is basically the main threat against Israel these days. And actually, the recent 4 years almost. Which one is it? Iran. Iran is here, Israel is here. In between we have Iraq and Jordan mostly, and Saudi Arabia a little bit. And Iran has an Islamic regime since 78, the revolution. Until then we had very good relations with the Iranians. Israel, because of the Arab countries didn't want any relation with it, became friends with Turkey, Iran, and that's Ethiopia. And that was kind of an alliance, regional alliance that Israel had a strategic plan to be friends with, of course, with Cyprus in Greece. And those are the countries that we're in good relations with. After 78, of course, the relations broke, and their claim was always that the Zionists are the enemy, that the Jewish state should be demolished, and they're continuing that. Basically, they're saying it almost in every speech of a leader, Iranian leader, they'll mention that. There's the big Satan, which is the USA, America, and there's the little one, which is Israel, and that's relating to what we said before, Israel as a force of the West, of the Christians, of the anti-Islamic in the Islamic land, Islamic world. And this is a very, this is a narrative that they are mentioning all the time. Now, add to it, now they're there. They're not a real threat to Israel in terms of regular war, right? Now there is another issue, the nuclear, the atomic bomb, which is an option. They started basically 25 years ago with their atomic plan. It started after Pakistan had the first Islamic bomb, and they decided they want that too. Why? As a strategic weapon. Not necessarily to use it, but as a strategic weapon. When they started that, Israel was one of the first to know. I think it was the first information got from Israel about that. And when they developed it and continued it, Israel started to try to shake the world. Hey, listen, there's this mullahs, this Islamic leaders, they're going to have a nuclear bomb. A nuclear bomb where? It's not only against Israel. What do we have here? It's all the oil countries. The thing that is very important to the world and America itself too. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, all these countries. I think then it was like 20 years ago, they had the most oil production in the world. Now it's not. Now it's like third or so. But it's a very strategic area, okay, for the whole world. And Israel tried to do the changes. Nothing basically happened. And then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was elected 2009, right? Nine, right? Eight was, yeah. And that was one of his main things in concern. His view of himself, and that's what the book that the guy is writing is about, that he's the protector of Israel. He's the one that needs to make the Israeli safe for years forward. And he saw that, of course, after the peace with Egypt, after that there was a peace of Jordan, we didn't mention, but there was. So these two countries are in peace with us, more or less. Saudi Arabia is no threat. Syria, even though they talked a lot, and talking even before the war there, they didn't really try to do anything. There were even a few times that we had talks with them about peace. Lebanon, of course, is not a threat. So we're okay, right? No. Iran was a threat, is a threat. That's what Netanyahu sees. And when you add the Islamic vision of demolishing Israel with a bomb in the other hand, you're saying, okay, we have a problem there. That's his view, that's how he saw that, which sounds logical too. And he decided to bring it out loud to the world. And how did he do that? He did that by saying it, speaking about it in every meeting he had with US presidents, with US congressmen, with the Europeans, with everyone. He was very visualized, trying to show the world that. And at the end he succeeded. He succeeded by pushing the Obama administration to think about that. Now add to that 9/11, which happened a few years before, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, all the thing of the world, the West world, especially the US, against the Islamic extremists in the center of Asia and in the Middle East. Wars that going on. He managed to explain that Iran is the next big enemy, apart from, there were the Afghan, the Islamic, of course what happened now, the Taliban in Afghanistan, and Iraq, Saddam Hussein and all that. So he managed to describe to the West minds, leaders especially, show them, listen, we have another threat there. You have to deal with that too. We can fight with them. We have the options. As the guy said, it's a known secret that Israel has atomic bombs, of course, nuclear weapons, and and submarines, etc. But we don't want to get there. We don't want even to get there. To have we have to do that before, in advance, to prevent that from them. This is the UN General Assembly. He's used that. He had speech every year. In each year, Iran was the head of it. He's giving that, looks like a kid drawing it, but that's the bomb. He's showing when they had enough capacity of uranium, reached uranium for a bomb, and where is the red line, and etc., etc., etc. At the end, it worked. Okay, now look at the Middle East. We have Israel here that can defend itself. It showed in a few different wars that have advanced technology, westernized country mostly, and sitting here and have relatively, it's stabilized. It's a stable country, but relatively quiet era during the 90s, during the 2000s, and you have Egypt, which has its own economical problems and some problems inside. You remember the revolution that was at the end of the beginning of Obama era, when the President Mubarak was kicked out. A guy from the Muslim Brotherhood became a president. His name was Mohammed Morsi, and then he was kicked out by the head of the army, which is the president now, Mohammed al-Sisi. And we have Jordan, as we mentioned before, since the beginning, it's a kingdom, and the king, he has his few tribes that support him, and all the rest are tribes that not really support him, and the Palestinians, which are almost a majority in Jordan. So it's not a real threat against Israel. Saudi Arabia, I mentioned, they don't have any fight with us. Syria is now terrored by the war, the civil war. Lebanon was always a weak country, and especially now we can see how weak it is. So basically no major threats over Israel. Iran is the big one, but Iran is not only a threat against Israel. Against who? Yes. Saudis. Basically against all the Arab Sunni world. Now you know the difference in Islam. We have Shia, we have Sunna. The Iranians are Shiite. There are Shiites in Iraq, a little bit in Syria, a little bit in Bahrain, which is here, and in some other places, but Iran is, and Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah are Shiites. Iran is the center of, it's basically the only place that they have, that the Shiites have nation and force. And what they do, one of the visions of the Islamic regime of Iran is taking the revolution out, exporting the revolution, just like the communism. They have their own vision on that, exporting the revolution of the Islamic nation. Islamic nation means it's not Egypt, which is secular regime, that the mullahs, the heads of the religion, are the heads of the country. And that's the idea. How do they do that? Exporting the revolution by helping in some countries around the area the organizations that are fighting against their governments, that they are doing terror attacks, and Hezbollah is one of them. Jihad Islamic is the one they support among the Palestinians, but Hamas too. Hamas is, they're both Sunni, but the Jihad is more close to Iran than Hamas. And in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood. In Sudan, they supported the regime for years, until a few years ago, the regime was fallen. In Saudi Arabia, they had lots of little organizations that they help. In Bahrain, they're trying to have the Shiite that they have there. They're trying to push them for actions against the government, and especially here. We don't have the name of this country. Who knows which one is it? Yemen. That's right. Yemen is in war for about 15 years or so, which is a war that, you know, when we talk now about Ukraine and all the people who died there, in Yemen, dozens of times more people has died and starved and whatever you want. Now, what Iran role in it is that they support the underground, or the organization that was against the government. The Houthis, it's a different, it's a special, I mean, it's a different kind of tribes of the population in Yemen. They give them lots of weapons via sea, bringing them, sending there. Some of the ships were stopped by forces by Saudi and the Western world, but a lot get there. And from here, they didn't stop by fighting here, they're attacking Saudi Arabia too. Do you remember the attack 1.5 years ago? It was here. Here, Saudi Arabia have the biggest oil production area in the country, and maybe one of the biggest in the world. They attacked it, and Saudi Arabia stopped for 2 weeks sending oil to the world because of that.
Abraham Accords.
We're there. That's exactly the reason. Okay, how does that related to the atmosphere that led to Abraham Accords? Now we'll combine the two things. In one hand, we said Netanyahu, Iran is the enemy, and pushing the world to work on it. In the other hand, Iran as exporting terror, exporting problems for the Arab regimes, what we call the moderate Arab regimes in the Middle East, all around the Middle East, basically. How does that can combine? Ideas? Yes.
They want to build an Arab-Israeli coalition against Iran.
As simple as that. If Israel, which is, as we mentioned, a nuclear state, and we say in Israel, she used the term before, according to foreign publications, because you're not allowed to say it in Israel, it's censorship. But everyone knows it's a known secret. Israel is a strong country, strong army, nuclear weapon, etc., with America supporting it over there, and Iran is the biggest enemy of there. Iran is our enemy, so mutual enemy, we can be friends. And it took lots of years to advance that. I want to remind you that after the Oslo Accords, there were relations between Israel and some of the countries in the area, especially Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. Those were the two countries that had, and Oman, relations with Israel, and Morocco, which is this side of the Mediterranean. After 2000, when there was the second Intifada, most of the formal offices were closed, but still there were relations, especially economical relations. And during the years, there were like connections between Israelis and them. What happened? What was the thing that made things much closer? The hint, 2015.
Iran nuclear deal with the United States.
JCPOA, what we call the agreement that America and the European countries and China got with Iran. The JCPOA was an agreement that left Iran, basically gave back Iran or lift most of the sanctions, not all of them, against Iran. Sanctions that brought, because of the Israeli pressure on the world, because of the terror things, because of the nuclear program, and because of some other things that Iran did in the region, America especially, but other countries too joined it. And when America is like boycotting every nation or company that does deals with Iran, of course you prefer America on Iran. So that's what we call secondary sanction. So they lifted all the sanctions over Iran, which led to hundreds of, I think it was $150 billion that were froze, or assets that Iran couldn't use, or the oil exporting that was stopped during a couple of years. It opened it. Iran had lots of money, and what did Iran do with the money? Mostly using it again for what it did before, meaning supporting terror all around the region, and of course corruption and other stuff. I just read today, they published in a newspaper in the Gulf about a huge corruption issue that happened in one of the center offices of the Revolutionary Guards. Revolutionary Guards is the section in the Iran regime that is controlling basically most of the economy. It has kind of in its own army, which is a stronger army with a lot of budget, and they are in charge of supporting the revolution, giving all the weapons and support to the organization that helped them all around the Middle East. And by the way, did some terror attacks in other places, like in Argentina when they bombed the Israeli embassy and the building of the Jewish community center, and in Europe, I think it was Hungary, that they had a terror attack against Israeli tourist bus, and of course Beirut. What happened a year and a half ago in Beirut? Do you remember?
The port?
The port, exactly. they had in the port a huge amount of material that is used, among other things, for bombs and for missiles, and it blew up and it caused a few hundred dead, and basically it pushed forward, it gave the crisis there, the political and economical crisis, a big push forward, and now Lebanon is not going out of it. So we're in a situation that Iran can continue to do what it does because the West let her do so. And when what they got from the agreement is that Iran will stop trying to get the bomb. That was basically the thing, that less enriched uranium, no centrifuges, that can work to build the bomb, etc., etc. They stopped it for between 10 to 15 years. It was 2015, and then what happened in 2000? When was it? 16? 16. What happened in 2016? No, 16? No, 18. Yeah, 16. Here, what happened?
Well, Trump got elected.
Trump got here, exactly. President Trump, with the idea that he wanted to change things, okay, in every field. He wanted to change things, to show what he's doing. That was one of the fields that he talked about before the elections and after the elections. It took a couple of years, and what he did basically is, and that's one of the reasons that in Israel he has lots of supporters, is that in the eyes of Israelis, he did lots of things in favor of Israel. One of the things was bringing the American embassy to Jerusalem, something that all American presidents promised, and he's the one who did it. And of course, the Iranian issue. So in 2019, he decided to go out of the agreement. America was the biggest sponsor of the agreement with Iran. He decided to go out of it, and because of that, Iran almost stopped to send oil to the world, sell oil to the world, and the biggest income branch of Iran, economy branch, is the oil. It stopped. It not stopped totally, but it went down in about 80%. And of course, lots of other things happened because of the sanctions that America again imposed on Iran. The economy of Iran got a big blow. There were I think 10 to 15 huge factories of European companies, like car companies like Renault, Peugeot, and others, and the DAF, the Swedish, and others that had factories in Iran. They closed them, so they got a big blow. One of the criticism against that step, against Trump and Netanyahu, is that what happened is that Iran decided to go back to enrich uranium and go forward to the bomb. So it's true that that's what happened, but look how it happened and when. Iran threatened to do so just after President Trump decided to go out of the agreement. They said they're going to do so. It took them a year. They started to do it in very short amounts. When did they start, you think, to do it? The big amounts. When did they went forward very seriously with enriching uranium? And why? So I'll say when, and you'll say why. It happened, the first step was November 2020, and the second step, really going forward, was the end of January 2021. What are the two dates?
Election and inauguration.
Exactly. Elections, inauguration. Because Biden was elected, Biden said that America is, under his control, will revise the agreement, we go back to the agreement, and when he got into power, that's exactly what he started to do. The Iranians, the Iranians, what they do is just to have something that they can press the West with. What is it? Is of course the nuclear program. Is again enrich uranium to very high level, which is enough to creating, almost enough to creating a bomb. They're saying that the experts saying that they are between a month and 6 months of creating of having a bomb. Depends who you ask. And that's what they did to press. And then America said that America have negotiations with them, trying to bring them back. And there is a big debate with the Americans and the Democratic Party about it. Because the side that's pressing to do so, Rob Malley in the government, Robert Malley is the one that is having the negotiations with the Americans, saying almost by all costs. Why? Because if not, the other option is the army option, and starting a war with Iran in the area. We don't want that. We have enough problems all around the world. We have China, we have Russia, Ukraine, name it. We don't want that. And if we can solve it, at least delay it, that's the best thing to do. The others are saying that basically what they do is giving Iran everything they want, including all the money back, unfreezing the assets, and have the option to sell oil, lots of money to the regime that supports terror all around the world, especially in the Middle East, again, leading to war. That's the two ways to see that. Now, for a few months, they're saying that they're almost signing, but they didn't yet. One of the reasons is because Iran wants that America will lift sanctions from the Revolutionary Guards, which is basically a terror organization, maybe the biggest in the world. And because of criticism that the American government has from around the world, they now rethinking about it. So I think that's the thing that stops America going back to the agreement. Israel is against it, even that government, which is center-left government. All the leaders are saying that they're against it, even though they're not fighting with the US as Netanyahu did, then trying to participate in the negotiations, kind of, to give limits to things. And of course, one of the things is the Revolutionary Guards, keeping them in the terror lists. We have that, and we have those that are afraid of the big enemy here. They are here. There are countries, especially United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, that they are relatively open, relatively liberal, okay, not in West terms, but relatively liberal, especially Bahrain, by the way, even though they're a Muslim country, they have, they can drink alcohol and stuff, they have bars and stuff, which is harder to find in UAE, and it's very hard to find in Saudi Arabia, which the Muslim law is still more or less in charge. There was another change in the governments here, or in the ruling section here in two countries especially, here and here, that made the change that led to Abraham Accords, which was that there are two leaders, new leaders, young leaders, and those that look forward on the visions of the country, not for the past as the other leaders were. One of them is both of them called Muhammad. One is bin Salman, which is which is he's ruling the country in Saudi Arabia, and the other one is Mohammed bin Zayed, which is ruling United Arab Emirates. They basically have connection with the Israeli government for years. Quiet, and they're trying to continue, but they didn't have enough power. They didn't gain enough power to do the real steps forward. So it took them a few years. All the things that happened, and especially when Trump went to power and went out of the agreement, and the dangers from Iran is visible, and they see the power of the US, of Israel over the US, meaning the relations of the special relations between Israel and the US, and especially between Netanyahu and Trump, they decided, okay, let's go forward. Let's do that. And what did they do? 2 years ago exactly, in a joint statement of Trump, Mohammed bin Zayed, and Netanyahu, they declared about going forward to get relations, Abraham Accords, and it happened they started it, Bahrain were the second, Sudan were the third, and Morocco the fourth. Sudan is still shaky because of they have problems, inside problems there, the government is almost falling, etc. That's the agreement that was signed in September 2020. In the White House, Netanyahu, Trump, the Abdullah bin Zayed, the foreign minister of United Arab Emirates, and Mohammed Nasser something, the foreign minister of Bahrain. What happened since then? Unbelievable. The connections, the economical connections between United Arab Emirates and Israel became huge. In like 1 year, they went from $100 million commerce to $1.5 billion in 1 year, which is huge, and it's going up risingly. That's the summit that we had 3-4 weeks ago in the Negev in the south of Israel. That's the Bahraini one. That's again the same one that was you saw in the recent picture, the UAE one. That's Nasser Bourita, the Moroccan, Blinken, Lapid, which is the Israeli foreign minister, and the Egyptian, Samah Shukri, the Egyptian foreign minister. Because this government is continuing what Netanyahu's government did and expanding the relations with them, etc. Economically, it's a big issue, but we don't want to talk about it. We'll talk just one word about the strategic meaning of it. Apart from economy, apart from other things, Israel can give them, technology and water systems that use water in the deserty areas, and solar systems, and cyber, whatever you want, fintech. I'm writing like every week. I have a big article in El Monitor about the specific things that that they want from Israel and getting from Israel. What do they give to Israel? She's gonna put the map, and maybe then you can. The map. Do you remember the map? Visual the map of the Middle East. Where is the UAE in terms of?
It's on the Persian Gulf.
Exactly. On the Persian Gulf. And Bahrain? Well, they have like, I think it's 70 kilometers, which is about 40 miles. The distance between the UAE and Iran. Now, Iranians see disturb Israel and fight Israel through their proxies, which are, as I mentioned, Hezbollah. We didn't talk about the Lebanese war, but Hezbollah was there from Lebanon to northern Israel. Hamas and Jihad Islamic from Gaza to Israel, missiles, etc. By the way, a few hours ago, the Islamic Jihad shot one missile toward Israel and it was went down. And suddenly, Israel is here, and Iran is here. Okay, it's very, very close. Suddenly, the Iranians feel Israelis in their backcourt. Exactly how Israel feels about Hezbollah and the others. Now, it's not only economical relations. No one can fool us. It's relations. It's security relations by all means. It means like there was a debate in Israel if America should give should sell UAE the F-35, because Israel is the only one that has it in the Middle East and has the superiority over all the others. Why should we give them? But that's exactly the opposite. Because if we have it here, if they have it here, the F-35, we have it here. And when it's here, it's a huge threat over Iran. And if you want to bomb nuclear areas or places that have specific places that have it, where Iraq is one very important one, above Tehran, there was like 3 or 4 to come to here. Or from here, it's much easier from here. And of course, all the other things that you can think of, million of other things of intelligence and other issues. So that's a huge blow for Iran, the agreements. That's why they're attacking them all the time. Bahrain is, by the way, even more with Israel in terms of security. The 5th Fleet is here in Bahrain. The main base of them is here in Bahrain. And when the Israeli foreign minister went to Bahrain, one of the first thing he did is going to the American base, meeting and taking pictures of him with the commander of the Fifth Fleet, and talk to them about why, to show the Iranians, listen, we're here in your backcourt. So that's in terms of strategically, army-wise. Now the other issue is, of course, this country. This country is behind Bahrain. Bahrain is basically almost a protectorate of Saudi Arabia. They're always behind the curtains. They are always with connection with Israel. I think 2.5 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, Netanyahu flew from here to here. There's a city they are building called Neom, which is a totally modern city in terms of technology and stuff. It's huge, it's amazing. And he met there with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and there are relations and connections and talks all the time. I actually got an invitation to get there because there are talks about train that will come from UAE via Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, to Jordan. We're going to look like that, to Jordan, and here to Haifa port. Why? Because instead of selling everything all around via the Suez Canal, etc., it's much cheaper to take it by train to Haifa and from here to Europe. So,
Can you say something about that? Because, the peace with Egypt is what we call the cold peace. And it's problematic with the Jordanians and definitely with the Syrians. What's your vision of how the relationships between Israel and the Gulf states?
that was one of the things that amazed Israelis, because they used to, Jordanians and Egyptians, that we have peace with them, but it's a cold peace, as you mentioned. The people didn't really engage to the idea of peace with Israel. Lots of organizations like the lawyers, clerks, and teachers and others boycotting Israel. When we got to United Arab Emirates, and I got there like a few weeks after the agreements, we were amazed to see how welcomed we were. As Israelis, as Jews, they basically hugged us. And it was unbelievable for Israelis to see someone from another Arab country treating you like that. That was the first time basically that kind of relations happens. So it's a different version of peace. Morocco, by the way, is very friendly with Israel too. They're buying Israeli weapons too. They want to buy the most advanced one like Iron Dome and others, but not yet. They're getting help with cyber because they're having a lot of attacks, cyber attacks from the Iranians, and in other issues. Saudi Arabia won't join up till now, not in the coming future, until the king is going to die and his son, Mohammed bin Salman, will going to be their king. Only then it will happen probably. That's for the future. The thing that happened is, from your remark, that they pulled Egypt a little bit from the cold peace, and now Egypt is starting to join the party and starting to get agreements with Israeli companies, especially in agriculture, because Egypt is strong in agriculture, and in gas. Israel has gas fields, natural gas fields all around here. Getting gas, sending it to Egypt. They have somewhere here, they have factories that make the gas liquid, and sending it to Europe that is hungry for the natural gas because of the problem with Russia. So we have a very strong relations in that field with it, in the energy fields, and they're starting to be more warm about it. There was another, that's my last word, another agreement that was signed, Jordan, UAE, and Israel, with having a huge solar plant in the desert in Jordan that will sell electricity to Israel. In return, Israel is building here in the north desalination factory system that will have water from the Mediterranean, desalinate them, sending them to Jordan, which has a huge shortage in water. So that's the idea of using technology in one hand and what Jordan can give, etc., etc. That's the idea of the new Middle East. That's what we're trying to accomplish, Israel is trying to accomplish with the friends, having the military and diplomatic things in the head against Iran. That's what led to it. And the other thing that led to it is that the Palestinians and Israelis failed to have between them any agreement, and you can see it viable in the coming future. So these countries decided, okay, forget it. We'll say that yes, there is a need and peace and blah, 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 but we'll do what we need to do for the interests of our countries.